Hey everybody, welcome back. It's Mr. Barnett, ready for our next discussion. So this one is basically moving into the 1970s a lot more, and has a lot to do with foreign relations. So Nixon, remember, we talked about how he wanted to create a better relationship with China. He did some things in Vietnam, like, attacking Cambodia, not really in Vietnam, but related to Vietnam. Um, he tried to focus on Vietnamization, which is transferring the burden of the war onto the Vietnamese military instead of the U.S. military. But really, what he wanted to focus on was trying to help ease tensions with the Soviet Union and China. So one of the things he really focused on was China. He really helped the United States relationship with China in three major ways. One, he actually visited China himself. That was the first president to do that at that point, while president. He opened up trade with China quite a bit, and he opened the way for basically replacing. Remember how we had actually had Taiwan representing all of China in the UN? He actually opened the door to allow China to represent themselves and have Taiwan be a separate entity, which really went a long way in trying to repair our relationship with China. I'm going to show you an image in a second that always makes me laugh because it makes me think of a story. So I think it's valuable. It's worth telling this story. It's funny. You'll appreciate it, I hope. Maybe I've already told some of you this, but it is about my double date with my wife's ex-boyfriend and a bunch of Korean dudes. So my wife, I had actually proposed to her. We were engaged. Excuse me. And her ex-boyfriend texted her and said, "Hey, we should go out to dinner sometime." And she responded by saying, "Well, I'm engaged." And he's like, "Oh yeah, I know." Backtracking a little bit, he was like, "Oh, I know. Yeah, invite David too. That's fine. I'll get a date," he said. And so my wife was like, "Okay, I guess so." Well, her ex had actually just gotten back from a mission to South Korea, and he said he was going to get a date and he was going to take us to this Korean restaurant. When the day finally came, we were, going, it was going to be awkward. I knew, for me at least, and for my wife for sure. We go to this restaurant. He gives us the name of the place. It's called Sam Hock. It's in Provo. Excellent, by the way. Anyway, we get there and he hadn't found a date, for whatever reason. I will not make any comments about that. Anyway, he ended up inviting his Korean friends. Like he'd met some Koreans at BYU, and so he invited. If I remember, there were 4 Korean guys that show up. So he's on a date with 4 Korean dudes, and I'm with my fiance, what will eventually would be my wife. And this is our first time at an Asian restaurant with people from that country. And so we sit down, we're like, okay, we have no idea. We have them help us order, basically. And some food starts arriving and we start eating it, They put this plate of amazingly barbecued meat. I can't remember what it was, but we're putting in our plates, getting with rice and using lettuce leaves to make wraps. And it was delicious, right? Well, our food arrives and we start gobbling up our food too. And being Americans, we pull our order in front of us and start eating off of it. Well, it turns out the original meat that had come to our table was not an appetizer. It was one of the kids' meals. And we hadn't noticed that we had shared his food. That's kind of Asian culture, right? You share everything. It's a family style dining where you put everything in the middle and everybody kind of takes from it. Even if you ordered something, it's like ordering it for the whole table, if that makes sense. And so we ate all this kids' food and then went and devoured our own food, looking like fat white Americans. Anyway, so really awkward when we realized that, and we had already eaten, at least I had already eaten all of my food and hadn't shared any with this kid. Really, really awkward. They did compliment my chopstick skills though. So that was another good thing that came out of this. Sam Hock, the restaurant, fantastic. Great thing to come from this story, but also complimented by Koreans on my chopstick skills. Anyway, that's what I think of when I see this picture, because Nixon looks super uncomfortable. Like, they're reaching over me. What do I do with these sticks? Kind of funny. Anyway, so Nixon also tried to improve our relationship with the Soviet Union. He didn't want to go to war with them. We're dealing with a war in Vietnam already to try and stop the spread of communism. And so he tries a few things. He increased trade with the Soviet Union. Remember, JFK had started trading food with them, especially wheat. And Nixon increases that. We signed a treaty called SALT I. This is the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. SALT I. It basically limits some types of nuclear weapons. They were mostly older designs that we didn't really focus on anymore anyway, but it was a step in the right direction. Both sides were like, okay, we're not going to use these weapons. We have better ones anyway, but at least they're coming to an agreement on something. And we also began research projects along with the Soviet Union. So especially about farming, we were trying to figure out how to increase yields in farms and things like that together, which is a great way to become friends, right? Do science together. The Middle East is an area we had to put a lot of focus on. It's becoming more and more important at this point as the world relies more on oil. About half of the world's oil came from the Middle East by the 1970s. And the Middle East, as you know, hopefully you've heard about, is kind of a touchy area right now still. There's a lot of poor relations that we have with some of the countries there. They have poor relationships with each other sometimes. Israel creates a lot of problems there, not necessarily by their actions, but by their existence. Sometimes their actions too. But one group that formed during this time was something called the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC. They organized into basically one body that would make decisions together and try and basically maximize profits of oil. It's kind of like a trust for oil. This is really good for those OPEC countries, but really bad for the customers, which includes us. These dark green ones were the first OPEC countries, and then the light green ones joined later. So Israel was still supported by the US. We still support them now. And a lot of countries in the Middle East don't like them, of course, because the British had actually kicked Muslims out of their land in Palestine and replaced them with Jews that they had given this land to. We gave them money and military equipment, which made a lot of the Arab nations very upset. Basically, they didn't like that because Israel had gone to war with several of these countries. They didn't like that we were giving them weapons, especially because our weapons were better than most of the world's weapons at this point. So instead of fighting us directly, a lot of these countries that are a part of OPEC actually joined together and refused to sell oil to the United States. This actually ends up resulting in a 350% price increase in oil overnight, essentially. This puts a lot of pressure on the United States, of course, because imagine right now what gas is like, what, $2.50, something like that. And if we wake up tomorrow and suddenly the gas is like $9 a gallon, that would put a lot of pressure on our politicians because everyone would be really upset. And that's what happened. There were actually lines of people waiting to get gasoline at this point because it was like rationed, basically. It was super expensive. It was hard to get. And so you'd try and fight for whatever gas you could get. That really is kind of the end of this chapter, actually. I'll be giving you a review tomorrow to work on, and we'll start studying and preparing for the test, which will be coming up soon. I'll let you know on date on that for sure later. Awesome. Thanks, guys. I hope you have a fantastic day. Try to get some exercise and do something fun, but get your homework done too. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.